unmute. Peter, I'm introducing Steve. His presentation carries a very good introduction of himself. I might just say we go back a long ways. We are great friends, and we have worked on creativity. Well, anyway, no, I'm going to shut up. Steve, are you ready to roll?
I am.
All right, I am going.
Well, let's put the slideshow up. Ah, great. Okay. All right. So I what's going on here now?
You can just talk. We hear you.
Okay, great. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you folks. Peter has said some really nice things about you, and this is a very bright group, which is very exciting for me. So this is going to be a presentation on how to access and use your personal creative process by yourself, or if you choose, with someone else who is remote.
Steve, I'm just going to interrupt and ask everybody to mute yourselves while you're speaking right now. There's several people are not muted yet.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Let me know when mutation takes place.
It looks good.
Mutation is a part of this process, so
yeah. Mutation is underway.
All right, great. Before I continue, I want to tell you my favorite quote, and was by Sir Isaac Newton. If I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulder of giants. There will be a lot of giants that I'm going to be talking about today, all of whom have contributed unknowingly, for most of them, one way or the other, to this. So let's have the next slide, please, Peter. All right. Well, this is who I am. And I also, when I was at Scott Paper, I had two signs in my office. One of them was, "We're reaching new bottoms." And the other one, excuse the expression, is, "Your ass is our bread and butter." And I think that's pretty funny. Anyway, when I was at Scott at the end of my tenure there as head of new product research, they had me teaching a course in creativity. And I taught this course in creativity because they sent me to a place called the Creative Problem Solving Institute, which is in Buffalo, New York. And I went there 1 week in June for 4 years. And in order to come back and teach creativity to the other scientists and marketing people and manufacturing people and everybody else. And what I have subsequently found was what they taught was really antithetical to individual creativity. It had nothing to do with the way people create, but more about that as we go on. What happened when I was teaching there, a friend of mine said, "Steve, you know, you've got to hear Dr. Robert Weisberg talk about creativity. He's an experimental psychologist at Temple University, and he's done a lot of research on creativity, and you've got to hear him speak." And so I invited him to come to my group and talk, you know, and he spoke for about 25 minutes, and it turned my life around. I mean, what he said was amazing and terrific.
Yeah.
And Peter and I have used that as a foundation for our work in creativity and personal creativity. All right, next slide, please. What Weisberg talked to my group about was the 9-dot problem. If you've not seen the 9-dot problem, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but what he did is he gave the problem to his graduate students over 6 years, and he asked them to solve the 9-dot problem, which involves connecting 9 dots with 4 straight connected lines without your pencil leaving the paper, so on and so forth. And what he found, which is the most exciting thing, is they could not go outside of their self-imposed limits, outside the box, if you will. And I hate that term, by the way. But they could not go outside the box circumscribed by the 9 dots unless they had guaranteed themselves that they couldn't solve the problem by staying inside. He then went on after that to look at the inventions, discoveries, works of art of a number of groups. Watson and Crick, the double helix, Edison, the kinetoscope, Picasso, the Guernica, Beethoven's last movement of the Fifth Symphony, Darwin's evolution, Coleridge's Kubla Khan, Kekule's structure of benzene, so on and so forth. And he found that the same thing was true for them as was true for his graduate students. Next, Peter, please. And this is probably the most important thing I can say to you today. Weisberg's quote, novel solutions to problems come about in an evolution as one gradually moves away from the conception with which one began. This incremental process is set in motion by feedback concerning the inadequacy of initial thoughts and ideas. Well, wait, hold on, Peter. Can you go back? All right, good. All right, so let's, why is this going back and forth? Hello? Okay. Concerning the inadequacy of initial thoughts and ideas, you've got to convince yourself that your old ideas do not work before you can be truly open to new ideas and look in unusual places. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. Peter and I, excuse me, Peter and I then got a copy of Darwin's 1859 book on the origin of species, and it gave his template for powerful, the individual evolutionary process, as he called it, natural selection. And in his natural selection process had 3 steps: extinction, mutation, and selection. And we found that that actually mimicked the individual creative process. And what Peter and I have done is we figured out ways of speeding the individual creative process up. Okay, next slide. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about the creative act in general. Creativity, the way I define it, and most people who are studying the field define it, is a process of problem solving. And it's different from other problem solving processes in that at its heart, it involves a shift in perception, a change of a point of view when the standard, normal points of view that you take don't help you to resolve your issue. There are 2 essential elements of any creative act. The first is what we call, or what was called a bi-association. The term was developed by a fellow named Arthur Koestler, who's a great writer. He wrote Darkness at Noon. Let's see, what else did he write? An Act of Creation, Sleepwalkers. And he had a place in Ausbach, which is in the Tyrolean Alps. And during the 50s, he invited highly creative people from all over the world to come and talk with each other about creativity. And out of that, he developed the idea of bisociation. Koestler defined bisociation as an association or connection between 2 or more ideas, concepts, or things that have been previously unassociated. The second essential part of the creative act is what we call evaluative exercise. It's your ability to find value in remote issues and unusual thoughts and unusual ideas, to find value for yourself in that truly makes you a creative person. The French poet Paul Valéry said, it takes two to invent anything. The one makes up combinations, the other one chooses what's important to him and makes it work. What we consider to be genius is much less the first one, making the combinations up, than is the second one to choose it and value it and make it work for him. And there's another French saying, which is wonderful, and it just sums everything up elegantly. Great ideas, many times, most times, come in shabby clothing. So it's our ability to recognize wonderfulness in the ideas that makes us a creative people. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. And I want to talk a little bit about the process of cruising to AHA, the solo creative problem-solving process. The most important part of this process is the first step, extinction. What we need to do is to get rid of our normal knee-jerk ideas to solve a particular problem. We need to rid ourselves of it so that we are more open to finding new ideas in different places. And in order to do this, we must focus on what's bad. The way we do decision-making in this process, it's not rational, it's all emotionally based. The stronger your emotions about ideas, either positive or, more importantly in the beginning, negative, the better off we are. Negative emotions, when you're starting to be creative, are much more important than positive emotions. Okay, the other thing that I want to say before we leave this topic is that the only way, the best way to tell how creative people are is to ask them. Because they're the only ones that know the leap that they've made to come up with something. And I have actually experimental proof of that. And if we have time at the end and you want to know what the proof is, I'll let you know. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. All right. So what we need to do in order to experience extinction is we need to take on a form of metacognition. Metacognition, of course, is thinking about the way we think instead of thinking about our problem. And that's going to help us create mental dismissal of habitual pathways, or another more elegant way of saying it is unconscious uncoupling. Let me give you two examples of how this negative thinking and creates unconscious uncoupling. Let's assume that you misplaced your keys. The first thing that you do is you look in places you habitually leave them. When you can't find them there, you look again, this time more focused, more concentrated, and with a little bit of cursing under your breath as you're looking. Can't find them again. The next thing you do is you try to retrace your steps. What was I doing here? Then what was I doing there? And then what you do? And you retrace your steps and you can't find them. So finally, you do a search in any area that's available to you without worrying whether or not your keys should be there. So you do a random search in unusual places, and all of a sudden, as if out of nowhere, your keys appear and you remember in a rush of thought why they were there in the first place. The most arresting part of this whole episode is that when you were doing your initial search, your keys were on the border of what you were looking at, and they were within your ability to see them, but because you didn't expect to find them there, but you couldn't see them because you didn't expect to find them there. I'm saying this incorrectly. Let me step back. You look at a place and it's not there. On the periphery of the place, your keys were lying, but because you couldn't see them when you looked, you went on to the next place. It was only that when you looked in unusual places and saw them that you realized that you could have seen them in your initial. So I don't know whether I'm being clear or not about this, but if you can't see them, you give up and you move on to some other places. Let me give you another example that I think that makes this point a little more accurately. I have a friend of mine whose name is Elliot, who was the head of the Firestone Tire account. He worked for a big ad agency, Darcy, Macias, Benton and Bowles. And Elliot was in charge of the Firestone account, and he had developed this wonderful ad for Firestone tires. And about 3 weeks before the shoot was to begin, he got a call from Canada. And what they said to him is, Elliot, you can't use your commercial because up here, a commercial has just gone on that's almost exactly like the one you wanted to use, and you can't use it. You got to come up with something else. Elliot said, okay, but he was distraught. He would think about A, he would think about B, he would think about C, and these all were really terrible. And the time was fast approaching when he needed something. And in a rash of anguish, he said, damn it, I will never be able to come up with anything that's that great again, ever. Fell asleep. 3 o'clock that morning, he woke up with the solution. Flash forward to the ad, which was an award-winning ad. It shows the president of Firestone lauding the engineer who had developed this new tire for them that was wonderful, and talking about how great the engineer had done, and the engineer is shown sitting there beaming. And the CEO says, now go back and make it better. And the final picture on this ad is that the engineer's now anguished face and hearing him say, damn it, I'll never be able to come up with anything that's that great again. I mean, when you dismiss your habitual pathways, you automatically are open to new ideas and looking in unusual places for them. And finding what's terrible is your first attempt at dismissal. The other attempt is what I call assumption reversal. Now, I've been credited by a real auspicious group of people to have been the first one to develop this, and that was Google. Google credits me for doing assumption reversal. I don't know whether I did or not. I might have heard it someplace before, but I wrote about it in one of my books. Basically, assumption reversal is, instead of thinking about what your problem, you think about what assumptions you're making about the situation that you have that are so basic that you don't even think about them when you think about your problem. And then consciously reverse the assumptions. I want to give you, 2 examples of where I was working with groups and we did this. One example is with a group called Geon, who are a subsidiary of B.F. Goodrich. I think they're actually not very far away from the Cincinnati area, this group, Geon. But anyway, I was down there helping them, and they had a problem, and they needed to come up with new ideas for PVC, polyvinyl chloride. And they're talking, and all of a sudden somebody says, what about plastic coffins? All of a sudden, there was this roar of anger and angst. He said, what are you, crazy? You can't do that. Plastic coffins, people think you're nuts. Nobody wants plastic coffins. As soon as I saw their negative reaction, I knew we had something. And I said to them, what assumptions are you making about plastic coffins that are so basic that you don't even think about them when you think about coffins? Somebody says, coffins are used to bury dead people. As soon as that person said that, somebody else in the group said, how about plastic pet coffins? What a wonderful idea. And this group developed, Geon Goodrich, a group in the Northwest country to make plastic pet coffins, and they netted millions and millions of dollars each year with this plastic pet coffins idea, just because the group hated regular coffins. The other experience that I had with this was with Philadelphia Gas. I live right outside of Philadelphia, and this was with Philadelphia Gas Works. And Philadelphia Gas Works called me in because they were having a problem. The problem that they were having was that the city decided in their wisdom that they could not shut the heat off if people didn't have the ability to pay, or said they didn't have the ability to pay. When people heard this, people that didn't pay their bills, and the company couldn't shut the heat off. And because people didn't really like Philadelphia Gas Works, they thought they were taking all sorts of money from them and not giving them enough in return. So I said to them, okay, what assumptions are you making that are so basic that you don't even think about them when you think about the situation? And the first assumption that they said that our clients here, especially the poor ones, see us as their enemies. And that's why they're not even making an attempt to pay their bill. I said, well, let's reverse that. Let's assume that they're our friends. What would you do? All of a sudden, they came up with this great idea. And what they decided to do was institute low-cost energy loans, and low-cost loans so that people could renew their places and make it freer from the cold air so that they would use less gas. And as soon as they came up with this low-cost loan for revamping their living conditions, people bought into it. They did this, and they loved the gas works, and they were the first, gas works were the first ones being paid for everything. So in both of these cases, assumption reversal allowed them to take a fresh look and come up with something that they might not have seen unless they reversed this basic assumption. And of course, what they were doing was this metacognition. They were thinking about how they think about things. And doing all of these things allowed them to actually experience extinction. So, let's move on, please. When the next thing that we're going to do is talk about mutation, or another way of saying it, inspiration. How does inspiration occur? What happens during inspiration? And how can we make it occur for us more quickly? Now, here's the problem. I mean, inspiration occurs in a split second. A lot of it comes from the unconscious, so that people are not really aware of what happens. But there was a wonderful study that was done by two fellows, his name's William J.J. Gordon and Tony Pose. Bill Gordon was one of the co-founders of a group called Synectics, which were a creative group up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Pose was his graduate student at Harvard. And this study was reported in the Journal of Creative Behavior, and it's called Conscious-Unconscious Interaction in a Creative Act. Gordon and Pose asked the question, what happens at the interface between the time you're not doing anything and all of a sudden the time that illumination hits you? Incubation, as they call that, and illumination. In other words, what's the micro process of inspiration? What are the step-by-step things? What exactly happens? So to answer this question, a group of people were selected who shared two uncommon characteristics. The first was they were deemed by their peers to be highly creative people. And two, they reported they had the ability to recall in detail the step-by-step mental events they went through during the illumination process, even though these only lasted for a split second or two. One might well question the veracity of this last claim. They might have fabricated their sequence after the fact as justification for their insights, rather than as a reporting of events that naturally occurred. Nevertheless, and this is important, almost all of them in one form or another reported the same four-step event sequence. One, I get a mental internal image that is remote from the problem domain. Two, the image becomes fuzzy and distorted, softens. There's a general sense of motion, as in the rapid defocusing and focusing of an overhead projector. Three, the image momentarily disappears. And four, a new image takes its place, which is a hybrid or resonance form of the initial image, but it's now back in the problem domain. This offers the seed for a great solution. Well, the study may seem difficult to digest, but a self-reported breakthrough experience that occurred well over a century ago exemplifies what Gordon and Pose were describing in the field of organic chemistry. Friedrich August Kekulé was a professor of chemistry at Ghent University in the 1860s. He was working to elucidate the structure of an organic molecule that evaded all prior attempts at resolution. Here's what he recounted about his discovery. Quote, I turned my chair to the fireplace and dozed. Again, the atoms were gamboling before my eyes. My mental eye could now distinguish larger structures, longer rows twining and twisting in snake-like motion. But look, what was that? One of the snakes had seized hold of its own tail, and the form whirled mockingly before my eyes. As if by a flash of lightning, I awoke, and this time also I spent the rest of the night working out the consequences of the hypothesis. The snake seizing its own tail, okay, I guess you can't see where I'm talking, but looking at the overhead, the snake seizing its own tail gave Kekulé the hexagonal structure of benzene, arguably one of the greatest discoveries of the field in the 19th century. Of course, there's no guarantee we can willfully bring this seemingly magical inspiration into being, but we can consciously work to recreate the experience with external stimuli, strongly increasing the probability of discovering a new solution. All right, now here it is. There are three central factors we could replicate from this study that seem important to revealing the special insight. Can we have the next slide, please, Peter? Okay. Stimuli for the onset of the experience should evoke mental images. The more sensory information the stimulus contains, the greater the chance internal images will be generated. Therefore, the stimulus must be highly specific, graphic, and detailed. For example, let's assume we have boring meetings. It's a far better, though seemingly silly, to imagine holding our meetings on the moon versus holding meetings elsewhere. You need to create an image through sensory information. B, the initial image should evoke a noticeable emotional response, either positive or negative, and have some relationship to our summation created in the preparation phase, where negative feedback was reduced to a single phrase or a single word. So there's a connection between the new image and the problem that you had in the extinction phase of this three-phase process. Now, let me give you two examples of why this idea of general principles is so important. The first is, I was doing some consulting for Scott after I had left, and the consulting was on paper towels. Now, Bounty, which was made by Procter & Gamble, is a better paper towel than Viva. But what Scott had going for them is their decorative facility was far better than the one that P&G had. So if they could find a way to use the decorations on their towel to their advantage, it might have benefited people to the extent that they buy Viva instead of Bounty. So one idea was, how can we make a pattern with our decoration that's individual to everyone who uses it? Everyone has their own individual pattern. Oh, that would be wonderful. It only costs us $85 billion because if you take one of these decorating rolls, they cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So how the hell can we do that so everyone gets an individual shot when they see the towel? Well, what happened was the woman who was in charge of marketing went home. The next morning, she was putting on her makeup and said, holy smoke, she had this great idea. Why don't we put the makeup mirror on the towel so everyone could look at it and see themselves and their beauty in the makeup mirror? Of course, that was silly. And then she looked at, what's the general principle here? The general principle was not that it's unique for everybody who looks at it. The general principle is it has the perception of uniqueness. And when she said the perception of uniqueness, she came up with the solution. A zodiac towel. 12 different types of towels, each having the zodiac sign on it. So people who bought their zodiac sign would find themselves in the description. And there were only 12 of them, and this went off like a rocket, sold a lot. Because she saw the general principle around putting a mirror on each paper towel. The next one that occurred was I was asked by Supermarkets General Corporation, it's the Pathmark group, to come in and work with their people around teaching them how to be more creative. That's sort of a silly thing to do, but I said, yeah, what the hell. So I went in there and there were all of these folks who were assistant store managers, real bright, but they said, yeah, you show us, pal. You show us how to be creative. We'll have to be creative all the time. So I said to them, okay, let's work on the most important problem that you have. The most important problem that any supermarket has is shoplifting. The problem with shoplifting is that it's a misdemeanor. So if somebody is caught shoplifting, they can come back and do it again. And these supermarkets lose 28 to 30% of their profit because of shoplifting. So I said to them, what could you do if you had all sorts of opportunities? Well, there was no restriction on you. And somebody said, well, we should do like Saudi Arabia says. If we catch somebody shoplifting, we should cut their hands off. Now they won't be able to shoplift. And everybody, blah, blah, blah. I said, wait a second. What's the general principle here? And somebody said, increase the penalty for the crime. And then someone else says, but we can't increase the penalty for the crime. And then the other person, the next person says, well, let's change the crime. What a great idea. So when people were caught shoplifting again at Pathmark, I don't know whether you have Pathmark out where you guys are, but supermarkets general, they were told they were persona non grata in the store. So if they were caught in the store in any other store that was a supermarket general store or any other store in the area, they would be charged with criminal trespass, which is a felony. Once word got out that SGC was charging people with this felony of criminal trespass instead of shoplifting, shoplifting dropped 47%. Unbelievable. It's so important. What you need to do is just fantasize, and from the fantasy, it just turns you on. Even though you can't do it, what's the general principle? And that'll bring you back to this three-phase process. So when you look for the general principle, what are you doing? You're fuzzing the image. You're making it soft so you can change it, so you can get all sorts of hybrids out of it. It's really important stuff. So when you fantasize and something's exciting to you, don't worry about whether you can do it or not. Just look for the general principle in it, and that might help you. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide, Peter, please. The final piece of this study is finding a source of appropriate stimuli for the initial image. Peter and I have created a website that uses the brilliance of animals to suggest provocative starting points. Animal adaptation to environments by means of survival techniques offer a rich idea resource for almost every difficult business or personal problem we have. Caribous were the inspiration for snowshoes. Squid, jet propulsion. Hummingbird, helicopters. Bats, sonars. The jasana, which is a South American and African bird, helped Art Fry, who was the creator of Post-it notes, finally sell it to 3M, who were not interested in it. If you're interested in that, I'll tell you about it. Chickens have cells in their ears that reproduce themselves when the chicken goes deaf because of loud noises. And they're working on that right now, how they can use that technology in human ears. Earthworms, I have a patent. One of the patents that we have is on earthworms. Do you know how many of you, well, you don't have to raise your hands, but if you know how earthworms move, you know that the way earthworms move is they secrete a viscous fluid and they swim through the fluid. That's the way earthworms move. But what we discovered, that the fluid that the earthworms secrete is a natural fabric softener. Unbelievable. I mean, just this stuff, animals are just unbelievable. Geodesic dome was created by Buckminster Fuller by looking at the eye of a fly. Vampires have anti-clotting chemicals so they can keep their hosts' arteries and veins open as they suck the blood. Excuse me for being so graphic. Anyway. but it's very exciting. Animals, almost every human problem have been solved in one way or another by animals. So Peter and I have developed this process, this way of finding the right animal. And if you look at what the mutation thing says, you go to animal.cruisingtoaha.com. When you hit that, you click on where it says online tool, and then you click on Animal Cracker's online tool. This will give you a list of 20+ words. You choose the word that is most like the problem that you had at the end of phase 1, and you will see a host of animals that resolve this problem successfully. And that might be a help for you in developing your inspirational moment. So to sum this up, let's move to the next slide, please. So let's talk about what this first 2 steps is doing. We had a client, her name is Jill, and Jill had a particularly important problem. Jill was a freelance wallpaper designer, and she was doing fairly well until a couple of things happened. The birth of a new son, and when her son was getting older, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, she had to spend a lot of time with him and couldn't spend a lot of time, you know, on figuring out who to use to make the thing and what kind of paper to use and all that stuff. And then the cost of materials were rising. And she didn't know what to do about this because everything that she could think about wasn't working, but she hadn't yet dismissed it. So I said to her, what is the worst idea that you've had that someone has given you? And she said, the worst idea is use cheaper materials. I hate that. I said, great. Go to the animal.cruisingtoaha.com and see if you can find these 22 words and choose the word that is most similar or most opposite to what you hated about this cheaper material. She found the word quality. And there was a series of animals that were presented to her, and when she saw this animal, the problem was solved. This animal is the Australian male bowerbird. And what the male bowerbird does is he builds his own nest to entice female bowerbirds into the nest, and then you know what he does, and so on and so forth. So what he does is he seduces them by finding these colorful, beautiful elements that people leave around or that are remnants of other animals, and he covers his nest with them, making a beautiful, beautiful nest. And so all the female bowerbirds come in, and she had her solution as soon as she saw this. What she decided to do was not worry about all the expenses and make fine art out of wallpaper. Now, a couple of years later, after she had decided to do this, she's invited to Paris to their yearly fashion show. She was invited and won awards in New York to their fashion show. She also had people use her material in these high-class hotels. What's that place we were talking about? Yeah, but yeah. She also, if any of you ever have a chance to go to Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, in their executive dining room, it's a huge, huge place where anybody can come in and eat. There is a whole wall, 4 walls actually decorated with wallpaper that Jill designed especially for them. This is wonderful. She got all of this from the bowerbird, and she got the bowerbird from quality, and she got quality from hating the fact that people were suggesting to use cheaper material. Okay, let's finish this up with the final 2 slides. The last thing we need to worry about is selection. How do we take the exciting and make it work? How do we defeat Murphy's Law? What we do here, and now we start being positive. When you fall in love, you got to start being positive. You know, most marriages last because people experience love at first sight. So they have more energy about correcting what the issues are. So the first thing that we look at is breaking an idea into 2 parts. The first part is what's good about the idea? What's positive about it? Can we have the next slide, please? Right here, right? Oh, no, sorry. Wait a second. Go back. Okay. So we don't have the list of what's positive, but let me read them to you. See if I can find them here. Okay. Oh, here it is. I got 6 phrases for you. 1, now we're looking at just what's good about it. Assume the idea can be implemented. What does it accomplish? What benefits does it yield? 2, under what environmental conditions might there be a maximum payoff? Instead of modifying the idea to make it work, modify the environment in which it operates. 3, what mechanisms make the idea work? 4, again, what general principles are at work here? 5, what other business opportunities might this idea provide? And 6, what makes this idea unique? The single biggest killer phrase when evaluating new ideas is the phrase, quote, the same as. That is the worst thing you could say. So you need to look at what makes an idea unique, not what it's the same as. All right, so once you developed all of the things that are positive about it, now you look at what's negative. And let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So what we do now is look at the negatives, not as problems, but as opportunities. And the way we look at problems as opportunities is to use the phrase how to. So for example, if one of the problems is it costs too much, you might phrase that as how to reduce the cost, or how to share the cost, or how to maximize the gain so the idea is cost effective. And once you do that and you're still in love with the idea, you're going to make it work. You'll make $1 million. All you got to do is pay me like 35 cents for telling you how to do it. Okay, final slide, please, Peter. So thank you for listening to me. I know I've spoken at length about things, and there are things that I've sort of glossed over, but I appreciate it. And I also appreciate, let's see. Yes, Mr. Messer, Bill Messer, for having me in, and thank you very much for this opportunity. So now let's get some questions.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Whoever thought creativity was going to be simple? This is it.
It is simple.
To you, genius.
Oh, come on.
So Steve,
Yes.
let me talk to you a little bit about, I write about creativity myself as well. And I once had a job which was called a creative consultant for a corporation. And I went to every aspect of the corporation, looked at how they were doing things,
Right.
and then suggested off the wall other ways to do them. just to open their minds up a bit, you know. And but what's the name of the guy who discovered the benzene ring?
Kekule, Friedrich August Kekule, Kekule.
So I heard a different story about him. I heard a story that said he'd been working on trying to figure out that model, that molecular model, for more than 20 years. And that initially he'd be having this dream of a snake eating its tail, which he just found curious that he would have this dream, but he disregarded it entirely. And as the years went by, he would have this dream as a daydream, not just a night sleeping dream. And it became a little irritating, but he still disregarded it. And as more years went by, he would find that as he was working, this image would start to superimpose itself over the work he was doing.
Oh, wow.
And that was really pissing him off, you know. And then one day when he had just about given up and he was really at his wit's end, the thing that had superimposed himself directly on this linear molecule that he'd been trying to figure out the model for, and he just picked up the model and connected the two ends, and he realized he had solved this thing 20 years earlier in his subconscious. You know,
And he couldn't recognize it because he didn't go through extinction.
It seemed irrelevant, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually a quote from him. The quote is from 1979, Rothenberg. I mean,
Right.
I can find it for you in its entirety.
So the quote reminded me of what you were talking about when people attempted to analyze what their process was, and they came up with a sort of quick way of describing what happened. Because maybe he would have sounded crazy if he told the whole story. I don't know, you know. But
it was his quote. I mean, it's a quote from him. I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd give that back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And one other thing you might like to know, today, for some unrelated reason, I was researching wet wipes,
Ah!
right? For, speaking of getting to the bottom of things.
Oh, I have an idea for wet wipes. I'll tell you after you.
Well, I do too, so maybe we can share them, but and make a fortune. But
everybody has to sign a confidentiality agreement now.
I'll tell you the story. Let Bill finish because I'm
an NDA, and then yeah, it turns out that only the ones made by Scott and the Cottonelle ones actually break down in water overnight, the way all the ones that claim to be flushable actually are supposed to do. So only the ones that your company made and Cottonelle.
Well, Cottonelle, I have the patent for Cottonelle actually.
Well,
So
there
I know
you
a
go.
little bit about it.
There you go. But for instance, Charmin and others, even after 12 hours, weren't breaking down.
You know, it's interesting. So I'm sorry, did I cut you off or you?
No, you're fine.
Okay. I have this idea about wet wipes that I try to sell to, who was our, let's see, who was our competition? Aside from Procter & Gamble, I forgot who the company was. They're up in the Midwest. But I had this idea about the big complaints that mothers have, and mothers are generally the ones that take care of their babies and use the wet wipes. And,
Oh yeah, but let me just interrupt. I wasn't talking about baby wipes. None of them break down. I was talking about the things adults use, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. I don't know about that. I was going to tell you about baby wipes. But,
Go ahead.
It's exciting because I was very frustrated with this. I had this, the biggest complaint that mothers make is that the babies scream and they wake up and they can't get into sleep because the wipe feels cold to the baby. So the issue is, how can you make a wet wipe, a baby wipe, that doesn't feel cold to the baby? So I had an idea. What you do is you make 2 layers of each wipe. The bottom layer is water impervious or lotion impervious, and the top layer is can transfer the lotion to the baby's skin. Now the idea was, excuse me, to take the baby wipe, 2-sided, and to turn it over when you're using it on the baby so that the lotion seeps out in measured form on the baby's skin and it doesn't shock the baby. I thought it was brilliant. I'm going to make a lot of money off this. So I went to the company. Who's the guy? The company, they bought Scott Paper out when Scott Paper, who am I to? Kimberly Clark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got an interview with Kimberly Clark to present this to them. And I presented it to them and they said, they said, the mothers won't think it's wet, so we don't want it. And that was the end. Instead of saying, how can we use this? And let's try that. Nah, they found what was wrong with it and they dismissed it, and that was the end of that. So that was my experience with wet wipes. I'm sorry, that's what was brought to mind when you talked about it.
Reminds me of Decca telling the Beatles that Brian Epstein that guitar bands are on the way out and these guys do not have a future in entertainment. So they went to EMI.
Right
on. Yeah.
So what happened with the what did you do with that? With the are you selling it? Or you?
No. It was just I mentioned something to somebody on the phone, somebody who always likes to be right. So she immediately corrected me. And I thought, no, I think I'm right. What usually happens is she forces me to go research things. 99% of the times I find out I was right. Okay. But it's just because she keeps challenging everything. Wow. And I was just saying that baby wipes aren't flushable, and some of the wet wipes that are for adults are. And she insisted that baby wipes are all flushable as well, and I'm sure I knew otherwise.
Oh, so please.
I have a friend that works for the sewer district. If she was here, she would tell you quite graphically that the baby wipes do not break down. They get them clogged in their pipes down there at the sewer district all the time.
Yes, sure.
And not only baby wipes, but most of the wipes that's claimed to be flushable don't break down in time to get past the sewer system.
As a matter of fact, there are some situations where Cottonelle clogs up because it's so open and not dense. It takes the water in the toilet, not that we need to talk about this at length, a chance to embed itself in the fibers, so those fibers get flushed before they're embedded. You don't want to hear that.
But now you're talking about toilet paper, right?
Yes.
Toilet paper, right? Yeah.
While we're on this subject, I can tell you a tampon cost me $600. The Roto-Rooter. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They say on the box that they're flushable, but they don't say that anymore, I think.
Tampons are flushable?
No, they used to say on the box that they were.
Okay.
They don't say that anymore because they're not.
Shifting gears, come on. Other people ask some questions, please.
You got down enough of tampons and toilet paper. Well, creative people, is he right? John, Scott? People in creative careers? I don't know what the rest of you do.
I think he's right, for what it's worth.
Worth a lot to me.
But Steve, I was thinking Scott needed 13 designs for that roll of toilet paper. They needed one for the non-believers in astrology.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, by the way, the trespass rule has just been enforced by Walmart on those 2 people who came in with swastikas on their face masks. They banned them for a year.
A year?
Trespassing, yeah. They should be forever, but
wow.
Yeah.
You know, that rule bothers me because it reminds me of the sus rules they had in England, where if you suspected somebody of having committed a crime, you could stop them and search them. And to have a tool like a trespass rule that you could arbitrarily apply to anyone you felt like, and then they are suddenly, they could have a felony charged against them.
My goodness.
A little dangerous. What do you think?
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was patted down because I stood next to a man who was stealing. And on his way out, the store detective said, him too, because I was standing next to him.
Oh my God.
So I wanted to protest. Oh, you can't search me. But I said, okay, do it. You know, and they patted me down and I was cleared. But I went to the manager after that and said, get rid of her.
So early in your presentation, Steve, you talked about, gosh, I didn't even write it down, but I wrote down what it reminded me of. And it reminded me of a supposed quote of Einstein's that says, genius is 2% inspiration and 98% perspiration.
Yeah.
So, was it
And I
Edison? Yeah.
And it reminded me of implementation and I forget what it was, something you said, and I wonder if it makes sense to you.
Well, inspiration is, it takes almost no time at all, but it takes years for some, and it never comes for some before it happens, and it's on you, and you have to capture it. So what I tell people is that, and there are times that people report that they're more likely to be inspired than others. One is right before they go to sleep. One is when they wake up in the morning. One is when they're in motion, either exercising or in a car. And the other one is in the shower.
Yes. I asked that at some of my sessions. I polled the people, and shower came up first. Yeah.
Well, I think it changes the electrical environment. I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing. Who knows? But
I think it changes the sensory region of your brain that you're using, right? The feeling of the water pouring down your body activates a different part of your brain. And in the process of your brain trying to get back to the other place, new synapse, or you take a new pathway or something.
Yes. Yes.
Could we address the fact that, okay, Marie, you go first. Go ahead.
It's my understanding it's a difference between focused and diffuse memory. And typically when you're focused, you don't allow that creative because you're in the blinders on. You're narrowly focused on the task at hand. But typically you're in the shower, you're doing that early, late in the day, and you have the diffuse mode on. So that's when whatever's been working, just like Kekulé in his subconscious, right, comes to the fore. And that's when you're able to.
You're also changing your environment suddenly, you're suddenly changing your environment.
Right, but that's specifically mine. So I do have a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe not so quick. So when you were talking about wipes and catamenials and toilet tissue, it occurred to me, I recalled when I was traveling overseas at one point with young children one of whom was in disposable diapers. I was really shocked to find out that when I was about to put the diaper in the trash, that it was taken from me and it was burned because it was thought of as old school paper diaper, although it in fact, had a plastic coating. And I was like what is, yeah. So I was wondering, in the creative process, how much you take into account how people use items in ways that you never expect.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Yeah. There's a funny product thing that I've run into working with companies, and that is there's a hand lotion called, and under everybody knows, kind of, especially in mosquito-laden states, that it's a mosquito repellent.
You're talking about Avon, right?
It's got it begins with A. It's called what is it, John?
Skin So Soft.
Skin So Soft. It is Skin So Soft. But
they will by Avon.
And they will not promote it as such, because then they have to go to the FDA and get permission for a mosquito repellent. But the underground,
interesting.
everybody's using it, at least my friends up in Minnesota, to keep the bugs off, to keep the state bird off their arms. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm sorry. It's interesting when stuff like that happens and things are unsuspected that come in and are sort of have negative impacts. I remember when we got together to name Cottonelle. They got all of the creative people together and they came up with the name Cottonelle. And when we brought it up into Canada, which is another interesting story, but when we brought it up into Canada, the Canadians didn't like it because in Canada, the term coton means cloth, not paper. So they didn't like the idea of cloth
Right.
with paper.
So I assume you know the famous story about the Chevy Nova being sold in Latin America.
But I think it's an urban myth. I've looked into it.
Yeah, I looked into it too, but I haven't found anything that disproved it either. But it makes a really good story, and it makes a point.
It means Nova, it doesn't go. But then again, Microsoft is very successful. And
I see Nova and Bod being,
yeah, Microsoft, they're doing very well, even though their name means small and flaccid. And therapists do very well. All you have to do is separate it, and it means the rapist. So, I mean, this thing about it, the secret word inside just doesn't.
Well, it's not so much a secret word. It's a word that in a different culture has a meaning that goes to people's minds immediately. If you name a car Nova and everybody immediately starts to joke about it, oh, it won't go. Who's going to buy that?
Yeah, like Microsoft.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that Microsoft has a sort of technological tone to it that you don't automatically.
It hit me right away. Maybe it's my problem. I don't know. Steve, did you have something, John? You're muted, John.
Okay.
There you go.
There he goes.
All righty. Well, I just back to Microsoft. One of the most famous oxymorons was one of their former products was Microsoft Works.
Yeah, it doesn't, does it? Yeah, I call it Microslop. Steve, the name of this thing was COVID Creativity. Can you point a little more pointedly to how working alone is people don't need to work in group, or do they need to work in? Are people better in groups, or do they work better alone?
All right, let me answer this, and I have notes on this, and I'm glad you asked the question. And you didn't know I had notes on this.
Well, it is in the title, so.
He's got notes on everything. Believe me, I've known him for a long time. He'll teach you how to play bridge too. He's a championship bridge player. And he teaches bridge.
Okay.
Speaking of Trump.
Yes. Hey, we need a new word for that.
You see it?
Yeah. Yeah. No Trump.
No Trump? Let's see it. Speak, Steve, so that you can get big again here.
Yes.
Use gallery view.
All right.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to talk about this. It seems, and a lot of people have described this, that the best way to be creative is not necessarily by yourself, but with someone that you trust who disagrees with you. Let me read some of these things to you. Adam Grant, who's a great writer, wrote an article for in a Times magazine. Kids, will you please start fighting? Susan David, Harvard Med. Negative emotions encourage more systematic cognition, leads to examining facts in a fresh way. President Clinton, surrounded himself with people who disagreed with him and who he trusted so that he could come up with the best thing. And Pixar had this a movie called Inside Out. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It animates different portions in the brain, and it talks about the fight between the negative and the positive portions leading to the best ideas. It's wonderful. As a matter of fact, now I'm talking about negativity also because that's so important. But people, the thing I want to say is that the reason that most people create is to avoid a loss, not to experience a gain. This, a Nobel Prize in economics was given for this idea to guys named Dan Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two guys who were at Stanford who came up with this. The reason that people are creative, they change what they do, they change what they change, is to avoid a loss, not to experience a gain. I'll give you an example how this worked for me. Is this okay, Peter? Can I?
I want to get in. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so let me
Creating
stop.
a loan. Yeah.
No, I think the best way is to be able to bounce something off one other person who has different views from you and who will disagree with you. And what happens is the great ideas are found in the disagreements in the argument.
Go ahead and give your example if you don't mind.
What was I going to say? I forgot.
Something that
Oh,
happens.
yes. About the people create to avoid a loss, not to experience a gain. When I was at Scott, after about 14 years there, I had my group and it was wonderful. And I got called in by the CEO who said to me, Steve, and this is a guy who took over for the fellow who was the CEO, who was a wonderful guy. He was a high-style Quaker from outside of Philadelphia. And he used to come to work and he used to sit with the people who were janitors, who were working on the line, who were the office people every day and asked them how they would do. He was a wonderful man. This guy retired and they brought this other guy in, to make a long story short, who had this big degree from Dartmouth, and they started treating people not as wonderful people, but as just objects to get them where they wanted to be. And what I discovered was if you love your product, you love your people. And if your product is just, you make it to make money, that's the way you feel about your people. So anyway, he called me in and said, Steve, we know that you're creative and your group is doing wonderful things, but we don't want to have great new products anymore. We want to make good products, but at lower cost. And I said to him, Phil, you're throwing your business away. No, that's what we want to do. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you and what you're doing. So I left his office and I was really chagrined. And my problem was that my resume sat in my office and it was gathering dust because I didn't think he was taking the right path, but I was making a lot of money there. About 3 months later, I had a cousin of mine who owned a hospital out in California. He got cancer, got sick. And I heard about this, and before he died, I went out to see him. And he said to me, Stephen, I never wanted to own a hospital. I never wanted to work on old ladies' parts and stuff. What I wanted to do was be in a lab. So I went back home, and 3 weeks later he died, and I went out to his funeral, and I came back and I quit. And the reason that I quit was I didn't want to look back and go through the same thing that my cousin Ron had gone through. So I quit because the loss that I would have of staying there was too great for me to even consider. But when I didn't couldn't think about the loss, I wasn't ready to quit, even though
Good story. Good
So that was
story.
what I was going to say.
To add to your story about having someone you trust to argue with, the Wright brothers, when they were working over at Kitty Hawk, the townsfolk thought they were crazy because they had one process where they would get into their room and they would argue violently over a point, and then they would stop and switch sides. And the other
great.
guy would argue against the thing he
That's great.
didn't believe in, and
That's great.
what a Wilbur and Orville, they switched positions and they came up with wonderful decisions arguing for the point they did not believe
That's
in.
great. That's really wonderful.
So let me tell you why I think Trump is such a great president.
Some other time, Peter.
I'm sorry if I'm
I can't put up with that one, right? Yeah.
So Steve, the question that Peter asked you was actually one that I sort of prodded him to do on chat, which is, I used to live in Europe, and my favorite place to write was on a train.
Oh, wow.
I loved all the stuff rushing by me. It came by me just quickly enough for me to get interested in what it was, but not quickly enough to be taken away by it. So it would stimulate something.
Yeah, but it was back here anyway. So,
Yeah.
You know?
And then, then I thought about like J.K. Rowling, who she didn't write at home, and she liked to write in a restaurant or a cafe where she was surrounded by other people, but still in her own bubble, creating these worlds, that she was creating. And so the question, to come back to like covidity, which is the word I made up, but we're stuck where we're stuck, is if you don't have somebody, you can call somebody up and bounce ideas back off of them, and they can challenge you and so forth and so on. But if you're alone and you're isolated, what are your suggestions for how to tap your creativity?
Well, I guess what I would do is get real negative about what I've tried to do to solve whatever the problem is. And then I would ask myself what assumptions I'm making that are so basic that I don't think about them. And I would use that as a starting point.
Tell me what you mean about getting real negative about the problem that...
You have ideas that you've tried, that you've thought of, and that don't work. What's bad about them? What's terrible about them? Why are they so horrific to you? What we need you to do is just heap abuse on them. What's the worst idea that you've had? Can you come down to one sentence or one word about that? Why does it stink? And after you've done that, then you can look at our animal crackers. Find a word that's maybe the antithesis, the antonym or the synonym for what you've come up with. And that might help.
Does that help?
That's interesting. That's a little bit like being Bill Clinton and trying to have all those other people who disagree with you in your head with you, and having to let go of your own ego and your own ideas, and to be able to think that your ideas, even though they were yours, maybe aren't very good.
Yes. Well, but we know someone who surrounds himself.
Yeah.
People who
I was thinking,
love every word he says.
what do we know a word that's the opposite of sycophant? I was trying to think of what that
opponent. Yeah. A nemesis.
Yeah, maybe.
That's close. Yeah, I think that's close.
Like Bill and I. I mean, he disagrees. We disagree all the time, and we're on the same committee.
Oh, these people are terrific people.
Aren't they?
Yeah, really.
I like to have somebody near me who's wrong most of the time.
Why, you've not had that happen for you?
Yeah, my father used to say, I've never made a mistake. Well, one time. That's when I thought I was wrong about something.
Oh, God.
That's it. Well, we're getting to the 2-hour point. Before we go, I want to say, Steve, it's all right for us to let people have this PowerPoint. That's actually
sure.
keynote.
And
So,
you go to my website, cruisingtoaha.com, and write to me. And if you have
And
questions, and I'm there for you.
I'll make a video of this thing available on gofigure.com, and anybody who asks for it, I will send the notes to, and that's it. I'll send out a report to all members tomorrow about what happened tonight.
I really appreciate this opportunity, folks. You've been really terrific to me.
Well, thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Can I just interject here? I know we're trying to like keep to the clock, and it's 3
No,
minutes.
that's all right. We can go over.
But I would like to encourage people who've been listening and might feel like saying something, but need a nudge, need a little nudge. Like, for instance, I was thinking, Scott, what do you think about all this discussion about Scott toilet paper?
As an old P&G guy, it was very painful. It's a great brand name.
And for lawn care too.
That's right.
That's a different company, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think so. Yeah. I would think so. Yeah.
Someone who's still muted. Kat, what do you think?
I'm sorry, what do I think?
Well, Kevin, yeah, fine.
We can go with you, Kevin, too. I was going to ask Kat that, but both.
Oh, Kat. Oh, okay.
I had to figure out how to unmute, and now I disappeared again, even though I just tried to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This was fascinating for me. I really want to pass this along to my son, who is incredibly creative, like his grandparents, not like me. But I really appreciate your presentation, Steve. I can't thank you enough for sharing this with us. And I really, I hope, Peter, that we can, make this available to people who weren't able to be here tonight.
I will.
And, publicize it, because I think it's, I don't know. To me, it was news.
There you go.
Good.
That's
Yeah.
good.
It was very well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know what I liked about it? I mean, I joked about the Scott brand name and all, but the basis in science and the research that was behind some of the creativity techniques I found absolutely fascinating. So they needed a big approach to creativity, as opposed to just, oh, I found these things happen, which we see in the ad world advertising.
Thank you.
So Kevin, you started to jump in. You still here?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes. No, I just thought you were speaking to me. You're speaking to Kat. So I'm sorry.
But since you thought that, what popped into your head? Anything?
Yeah, go for it.
No, nothing right off hand. Well, let me ask you this. I was at my video off for a moment because I had to step away. Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, there's no question. We're asking your.
He's just looking for input, for people's reactions.
Your take on all this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that one of the ways that, I'm in the medical device industry. I work for Abbott. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Actually, yeah. And so we're trying to get FDA approval on a new artificial heart valve. And I think that one of the ways that, and I did a biodesign fellowship, biodesign and innovation fellowship at the University of Missouri.
Wow.
A few years ago. And one of the things that I've often thought of as being key to my innovation is to explore different hobbies and different avocations. And one of the things that I've done to exercise another part of my brain is to draw, become an artist. And
wow, great.
I'm a self-taught artist, graphite and charcoal artist. I specialize in portraiture, both humans and animals as well.
That's terrific.
Gotten commissions, people have paid me to draw for them. And so it's a completely different avenue of thought and creativity than, and the perseverance and the creativity that I pursue in my art and how do we solve, I mean, art involves problem solving, just like engineering. Like if you're trying to create an image or an effect in a drawing or in a portrait, you've got to think about how to do that and to deceive the human eye to make it think that it's real when it's really not. And I think that helps me to look, I mean, I know that the phrase outside of the box is a very cliche thing, but it really does help me to think more artistically, because we have this valve that has to fit inside the heart, and it has to be a certain size, and it has to have a certain deformability and a certain shape, and it has to perform under the millions of heartbeats that a person will have over, you know, hopefully it'll last at least 5 years, if not 10 years, you know, this heart valve before it has to be replaced. And so that helps me to think of the three-dimensionality of the heart, the three-dimensionality of the valve. And I think about when I'm drawing a portrait, how do I create a three-dimensional effect and creating a person's image? And it just, I mean, being an artist has forced me to think more three-dimensionally. I mean, not that engineering didn't do that in itself as an engineer, but being an artist and helping to create that illusion helps me to visualize a valve even more. So I don't always have to have it physically in front of me. I can think of it and then think about how it would fit and how it would deform and think about it in three-dimensional space. And so being an artist actually has helped to inform my engineering. And people have asked me, well, does my engineering background and training help to inform me to be an artist in reverse? And I say to people, I don't know how a person can be an artist without having an engineering background. I mean, I say that facetiously, but I mean, I think of my art of drawing something very, I mean, it's certainly there's creativity, but I also approach it in a mechanical and a structural way too, almost like an architect.
We're kind of an engineer on
designing a building. And so they complement each other. My art and engineering complement each other.
You're a medical engineer, right?
Well, no, aerospace is what I got my bachelor's in, aerospace.
Okay.
And I studied mathematics in graduate school in St. Louis, and I went to medical school too. I'm an MD from the University of Missouri. So I have all this training in different areas, but I have to say it's really being an artist that has really helped me to elevate and to really think differently and to see differently.
That's wonderful. Wow.
Yeah. So
what is your full-time job though?
I'm sorry, what?
What is your actual profession now?
My profession is as a clinical development specialist for Abbott in the medical device industry.
Oh, wow.
So I'm developing a screening and procedure planning to get this heart valve to FDA approval. It's an artificial heart valve that is inserted and goes up into a vein in your leg and up into the heart. So they don't have to cut your chest open, you know, to valve into the right place. And so this particular valve requires FDA approval, you know, but nonetheless, and of course, testing on animals and on humans and so forth. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I would suggest that anybody who's trying to become a better innovator and think differently to pursue an art or a craft. It doesn't have to be drawing, painting, sculpting.
Music
is something I would like to do. Or, I mean, anything. I mean, crafts, needlepoint, anything that involves using your hands or doing something three-dimensionally or thinking three-dimensionally. I really think that helps to inspire creativity in other ways that can be used in devices or in widgets or whatever it is you're trying to invent or develop.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know,
Oh, by the way,
Kevin,
Kevin, can I ask you really quickly, how
Sure.
did you hear about this? You're in Minneapolis. How can we make sure you hear about future things?
Yeah, I used to live in Cincinnati.
Okay.
I used to work for Johnson & Johnson Ethicon in Cincinnati.
Oh.
from
Are
2018.
you on our mailing list? How did you hear about this?
Yes, I'm on the mailing list.
Okay.
I'm
I'm
friends
done.
with Mandy, and so
Okay.
Facebook friends with her and friends with her as well. And been to her house several times for game nights and whatnot and socialization and stuff. So I know
Kevin,
Mandy very well. And so so basically by being Facebook friends with her, I saw the announcement for this
Good.
meeting tonight. So
So Kevin, I just want to jump in and say I'm really glad we nudged you a bit to speak up
Yeah,
for
it's
two
good to hear
reasons.
from
One's
you.
very
Yes.
personal, but the
that's some of my
second one,
artwork right
the
there
second
on the
one,
wall.
that's what I thought. That's what I figured. Yeah.
Yeah,
Peter,
that's-
you asked about, somebody was talking about selling ideas. I have a way that animals help to sell ideas.
How's that?
Real quick, Art Fry. You know who Art Fry is?
Sure. Yeah, I talked to him.
You did?
Yeah, I interviewed him. Yes, I got the true story on the Post-it notes.
The Post-it notes?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you know how he got inspired?
In church.
Well, what I heard is better because it fits in with what I think.
Ah, well, forget the truth.
Of course.
Oh, run for president.
He told, just quickly, he told me he was in church with his hymnal, and he just had to keep putting his little tabs in his places for the upcoming hymn, and he wondered if he could make them stick.
No. That's inventing it. I'm not talking about that.
Oh, selling it, yeah.
It was harder for him. Yep. It was the idea, it was the that didn't work that created this wonderful Post-it notes. Yeah. And I'm talking about how he got it done. Quick story. He went to all of the 3M. He went to all of the VPs of this and the presidents and out of here. They don't want to do that. Didn't want to do it. Didn't want to do it. And he knew it was a great idea, but he couldn't get them to buy into it. So one day he saw this film, this movie about the jasana. It was the South American jasana. It's a bird that looks like it walks on water.
Sometimes called the Jesus bird.
Wait a second.
It is. It is.
All right, but let me tell you about it.
Go ahead. Who's stopping you?
This goes on with us all the time. but the reason that it looks like it's walking on water is what it's doing. It's got these huge web feet, and it's running on submerged vegetation right underneath the water. So it looks like it's walking on water, and he had this great idea. What he decided to do was to give samples of his Post-its to all of the executive secretaries, because the general principle here was, hidden support, finding hidden support. Who could he find that would be like the Jasana found, hidden support? Executive secretaries. He gave them all samples and told them to write to him about it. The secretaries got so excited. They wanted more and more and more. And he took them, all of their responses, brought them into the VPs, and that made him publish it.
That's great.
Find an animal that sells stuff, and that'll help you.
Animals have solved. Kidding, I know you. Evolution has solved every problem that will ever arise. It's been working on millions of years and billions of years, and it's done everything.
I think Darwin's ideas were specious.
Pardon?
Specious. Specious.
But Kevin, I wanted to get back to Kevin for a second. Kevin,
sure.
One of the things I found really interesting about what you said was you found solutions for three-dimensional problems through a two-dimensional medium. There's nothing particularly three-dimensional about drawing on paper, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. It's two-dimensional, but you have to create an illusion that the thing that you're drawing looks three-dimensional, that you give it depth in terms of values.
Right.
What the layperson would call shading, if it's really values that make a drawing look three-dimensional, like it's coming out of the paper. So there is a three-dimensionality to it, but I'm not limiting to people to the suggestion of drawing or painting. It could be sculpting, could be any physical thing that you're making, sewing, needlepoint, craft, arts and craft, any art.
I suggest music.
Yeah, or music. Yeah, music is great. Is a great way. But I understand what you're saying, William.
I understood your point. I just found it fascinating that the medium that worked best for you was one that forced you through the limitations of two-dimensionality to think about three dimensions.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
I thought it was really interesting.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nice insight.
Madeline.
Yeah. And one thing that I would like to pursue if I want to, I mean, as far as pursuing art, is sculpting. I've heard from people who are
Hey man,
that their sculpting
this
informed their ability to draw because it forces you to think even more three-dimensionally, of course, obviously.
So the other thing I wanted to mention is at some time or another, I want to talk to you offline.
Sure.
Because I've designed a medical device,
Uh-oh.
and I need to find somebody who's in the business of actually making them.
Oh, okay.
Is this device the opposite of Microsoft? Is it?
It's actually close to the same area of the body, but it has nothing to do with the functions you're talking about. But
Well, William, I'm gonna in the group chat here, I'm gonna give you my email address. You can
okay. If I hope I know how to download it from the chat, but
I'll have it, Bill. I have it.
I'll copy it by hand if I have to.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. This was
Thank
wonderful.
you, Steve.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
folks.
Thank you, everybody,
very much.
for showing up. Mandy?
Thanks, Steve.
Very well done.
Thank
Great
you,
discussion.
everybody.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you again, Mandy.
Nice
Well,
seeing you
actually,
all. Yes.
one thing I want to say to help you guys is my son is a head of a system where they make medical devices. And I forgot what the name of the company is, but Peter, I'll let you know what the name is and what he does. People might be interested in contacting him.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to have his company and Abbott competing for the rights to it.
All right, folks.
Well, this
Thank
was
you.
great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
everybody.
Bye.
Glad you could
Bye.
make it.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, Mandy. Bye-bye.
You too. See you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.